All right, we're live. So we've got some people who are going to start to join us online, but we have our beautiful in-person audience here. So thank you guys so much for being here. And I'm sure we'll start to get some more online people joining us now that we're doing our live broadcast too. But it's absolutely my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce you all to Carol Elkovich, who's not only our speaker this evening, but she's also here for our residency for the next month. So for the next 4 weeks, she'll be here with us at the Siena Art Institute, pursuing her personal projects, but also serving as a source of inspiration for our community. So tonight's talk is a chance to get to know a bit about her and her background, and also thinking about possible points of intersection with our initiatives here that we can be pursuing together in the next 4 weeks. So obviously, as always, we really welcome questions or comments, especially the second part of our event today we'll save for Q&A. So definitely feel free to ask questions. Also, for people who are joining us online, we welcome your comments or questions. You can just type them in the comment section and we can be sure to respond to them during the second part of today's broadcast. So I'll just take a few minutes to introduce this evening's speaker. So Carol Elkovich earned her Master's of Design at the University of California in Berkeley's College of Environmental Design. And she's currently an associate professor and the chair of the first-year program at the California College of the Arts. She's been working in the San Francisco Bay Area for over 25 years and navigates the terrain between imagination and concrete experiences of place. Her artistic work explores installation, sculpture, and painting, often blurring the boundaries of those dimensions. Her paintings and installations are exhibited nationally across the US as well as internationally. Recent residencies and exhibitions in galleries and museums have included Los Angeles, New York, South Korea, Ireland, and France. And again, we very much welcome your questions and comments, both from our fantastic in-person audience here at the Siena Art Institute and also to people who are joining us online. But without further ado, I will turn off my microphone and hand the mic over to Carol.
Thank you for coming, and thank you to the Siena Art Institute for the opportunity for the residency and to speak with you tonight. Let's see. So as Lisa said, I'm from California College of the Arts. I'm a professor there, and I've lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for most of my adult life, and I'm really pleased to be here for the next month. This is kind of a picture of my house and studio. My partner and I built our studios and our house ourselves, so it's really nice to have a studio at home, but it's always interesting to travel and to work in a different place because I think it opens my eyes to new things. So as Lisa introduced my work, I'll tell you that I've worked between sculpture and painting for a long time. I think that most of my work is often reflective on experiences in nature. And I was trained as a sculptor initially, and then I got into painting. Although I would say my paintings always have had kind of like a muscular kind of quality to them because I'll work on wood, so I did a relief kind of wood pieces for a long time, and then maybe the last 10 years I started getting into installation. So I do multiple types of work, but I thought I would show you the installations. And so the Viral Theories series, they're kind of deconstructed paintings that they're kind of parasitic on the architecture and spread across it. So this one was called There's No Warning System for It. And the Viral Theories series is really talking about, I think, both the beauty and sort of the terror of the power of nature. And so these pieces, initially, I think viewers kind of see them as, like petals or leaves in the wind. But when they're indoors and on the walls, I think that when people glimpse them out of the corner of their eyes, there's a bit of a reaction, like when you maybe find an invasion of ants in your kitchen. There's kind of a feeling of a swarm, and there's a discomfort. When they're lit in a space too, the natural light will throw shadows on the wall, and so they kind of animate a little bit. And I'm really referencing somewhere between that kind of vulnerability that we have to nature, as well as how art will often aestheticize it. So I like to work right in between there. And then a lot of my work is often about how things cross boundaries, how boundaries can be physical, but they can also be kind of political and psychological. And so I started looking at viruses and kind of microscopic things. And I guess it's important to note that I've been making this work for 10 years. So these are pieces that are maybe 8 years ago. And so there was no architecture for containment. It's another piece that I did. And I think it was definitely eerily prescient from the last few years to be working with that type of subject matter. So they're painted on wood. They're kind of small wood pieces, and they are individually painted. And then again, they kind of stand out in relief from the wall, so you can see the shadows kind of thrown onto the wall in this one. And the shadows move if there's natural light in the room. This one was shown in a museum in South Korea, and I tend to create kind of narrative titles. So this one was "Cynicism was shed like winter coats when the green appeared." And I was thinking about things and nature and the kind of renewal of spring, that I think is perennial for people. Butterfly Effect was shown in New York, and I tried to translate the inches to centimeters for you, but these pieces were very specifically laid out, and so in order to get these kind of arm length types of pieces to have an exact shaping, I created maps for them, and so each piece is numbered, and there's these tearaway maps that I'll make. So each piece has an orientation, and they're nailed on there, and then the map kind of it's on a very thin tracing paper, and so it tears away. And many times I've installed the pieces myself, and it takes maybe a couple hours, to do a piece about that size. But when I sent them overseas in Korea, they did a beautiful job. They were able to use the map. The other thing that was kind of interesting was they will spread across the wall, but they all pack into boxes about this big, which made international shipping quite affordable. So, it's time consuming to install, but that's the finished piece again. But eventually I started, this is a little bit about process too. And so each piece is hand painted, and then they're drilled out, and then you can see that I, kind of nails through them. But often I'll work in multiple ways between analog and digital. So I'll walk around in different places. Like if the pieces are reflective of a certain place, I'll take color notes in the landscape and look at different textures and things. And occasionally I'll record that through different apps on my phone. And so in the lower right there, you'll see I was kind of using an app that was isolating color in different spaces to kind of generate a palette for a piece. And that series right there was based on a piece that I did in a iPark artist residency in Connecticut. And that residency has these beautiful grounds, and they like pieces that are outside in nature. And so I tried a different way of organizing it. There was a boardwalk that went over these wetlands, and I made these rings that had the pieces contained in them. And it was really informative for me too, because I just recorded, I took a walk every morning and looked at what the water had done to the pieces. So the rings were stable, but as the water moved through them, it would organize the pieces in different configurations. And I thought that that was kind of an interesting way to think more about the shapes of clusters that I was going to make on walls, to see what the water and how it would organize the little biscuits. So then often I paint too, sometimes on metal and wood. And I would say my paintings became more experimental with materials and gravity. So I was doing more spills and different ways to kind of work with color and let things kind of mix as I let them pool and move around. And so eventually the work started to have these kind of backdrops of color behind them too. And so this one, I was looking for ways to be able to do installations that were, could be temporary and could be kind of repeated, or easily could go up and come down again. So I started working on this kind of sticky vinyl. And so that's a watercolor that's behind the little wood pieces, but it's on a vinyl. So it's essentially like a big sticker that I put on there. And so then the work started to evolve that way. And I was working on these really large scale pieces of vinyl that would just stick to the wall and feel like a fresco, but it was sort of removed without a trace, you know. And also I could work it on the ground and use different gravity, you know, to mix the inks, and then put it vertically on the wall. And so this one was in France. I've been to a residency a few times in France. I've been lucky to have been invited there more than once. And these pieces, I was really working with the color in the backdrop, was thinking about, again, about nature, but I was looking at like the growth of lichens and mold spores and all kinds of things in this medieval town, you know, where the things were hundreds and hundreds of years old. And so I was using that to generate imagery, and then also the kind of swarms. So there's a picture of me working in France, and you can see I'll pour the ink and let it pool. And then when I pour another layer, it lifts the bottom layer and spreads it again in this sort of manic watercolor, you know, kind of process. So when I knew that students would be here, so often I tell my students you should have in your pocket 3 references that you can say that you work with. So I thought I should take my own advice. So I would say Helen Frankenthaler has been a more recent, I've known about her work for a long time, but I would say more recently, as I've started working larger and larger scale with this kind of pouring thing, her stain paintings from the 70s were something that I was looking at again with a different interest. However, years ago I was in New York, and I saw her woodcuts that were, you know, kind of wall-sized, giant, beautiful pieces, and you can see the grain of the wood from the print there. They were kind of large plywood pieces, really. And I had been painting on plywood at the time, and so I was definitely taken by those, and they've always kind of been part of my influence, you know. looking at her work. And then when Getchi Mutu has been somebody who's been maybe a more recent person that I've looked at for their kind of collage elements. They're kind of fearless when it comes to putting whatever they want in an image. You know, it could be glitter, it could be a lot of different interesting mixed media. And this one was called Untitled parenthesis tumor. And so there was some inference there about these sort of internal organisms or things that we don't have a lot of control over, or maybe fears that are invisible that I related to in terms of the subject matter that I've been working with. And then Tam Van Tran, this particular piece is really beautiful. And the mixed media, the staples and the paper and painting with chlorophyll. And then the title is Beetle Manifesto. And so, of course, you know, my kind of swarms or something that I was drawn to this piece for too. So an interesting thing, I told you I've been working on this work for like a decade. When I first started it, I showed you the picture of my studio. My studio was up in the corner there. When I first started making these installations, a swarm of bees came to the house and nested they were like a basketball size, right outside my studio window, like up in the tree. And, you know, and so I studied it for a while, and I felt like, oh, I've called in the swarm, you know, but then I started to get concerned because bees were, you know, they were sort of dying on the walkway below, and I was told that it might be dangerous, that they would find an entrance into the walls of our house, which can be sort of devastating to the bees because you can't really get them out without killing them. So I called a neighbor of mine who happened to be like a gardener and a beekeeper, and she came with like a bee SWAT team. They had like a van and the stuff on, and, you know, they had an orchard ladder, and they cut it down, put it in a box. And but the swarm lives one street over now in her bee boxes, you know, and she's brought me honey from them and stuff. So, but you can see how there's sort of insect and plant and things that are beautiful and kind of a little uncomfortable, you know, in the work. And then this is a close-up of where you can see how they're in relief and stand off of there. And so when I started working on the vinyl, I got a little bit disturbed about all this plastic and pulling it off the wall. And I liked that I could just easily throw something up and restore the wall again, but I didn't like the plastic. So what I would do then is take the plastic and repurpose it into kind of residual pieces. So I'd cut them into smaller compositions and stick them to paper and start working them again. And so I would get kind of a secondary reuse out of those temporary pieces. So then fast forward, COVID-19 hit, the pandemic, and I've been making these pieces about viruses for quite a long time, and it was frankly kind of paralyzing, I think, for everyone. You know, just the world stopped, right? And so as I started teaching from my studio, I started thinking that, okay, I'd been making work about this for a long time. I don't think I can ignore this world-changing event. So as a marker in time, I started painting on pieces and kind of as a way to kind of process what was happening as the numbers rose. I just painted more and more, and I made about 3,000 of them. So this is about, you know, it's hard to tell from the photo, but it's about as long as this wall. And so I made a piece called Elegy, and it was 3 years of painting sort of little worry stones, you know. And then I got the opportunity to exhibit that in Oakland, my sort of where I live pretty much. And so you can see, well, this is still me in my studio, but I'll show you a little bit of the scale and process of, after I had piles and piles of them, I decided to start putting it up to see how it, would come together. Let's see. It's not letting me go forward. I think maybe I have to stop it first. Yeah. So then in Oakland, I was awarded an installation space to show the piece. And this piece is much too big for any kind of map. And it just is allowed to kind of swarm and change shape according to the space I'm given. So this one took about 5 hours to install. So it encompasses around the whole space. And it's called Elegy, and I created another element to it that was kind of like it's like a wailing wall. There's a branch in it, and it was around the New Year's this year. And so I felt like I wanted to have an interactive element for people to kind of acknowledge their losses, whether it was a person or opportunities or, and I gave them, it kind of followed traditions, and there's a Cherokee tradition, and there's also, like a Japanese tradition of tying something to a branch as a prayer of some sort. And so the piece has that element. So there's the branch, and people were invited to kind of let go. So this is a little panorama. Oops, let's see. So it was really gratifying to put that up, and there's just the simple message of what people are supposed to do with the small bandages. And so by the end of the show, the tree was pretty covered in branches, and bandages, And so then I thought, what do I do with this, And so I had to go burn it at the beach, and that seemed appropriate, as a way to release that. And so now that piece will actually go from elegy to ode. I'm going to France after this residency, and I'm repurposing the piece it will be strung like that into a large kind of free hanging kind of swarm or cloud, or the ones that I've started, there's kind of a feeling of maybe vines or something too. And so if elegy is a lament, ode is kind of a tribute, And so for me, it's repurposing that into something that would be about survival. And so that's what will happen to the piece next. So that's the Viral Theories series. And I don't know if it's ended. It might have. The ode might be the last one. Having survived this global pandemic, it seems like maybe that would be the end of that work. But hard to say. Hopefully that'll be the last plague we see for some time. But another thing that I've been doing is these series of pieces that are based on kind of ancestral lands. And so I went to Ireland for a residency there, and part of it was because my family on my mother's side came from Ireland several generations back, and I wanted to experience that place, So I had the opportunity to go through residency, and I was invited to interact with this, I don't know, like 500-year-old wall, that was in the kind of attic space of this residency. And so I made kind of some small pieces with the vinyl painting, ink on vinyl. And I was taking color notes, but then I started piecing it together. And the reason it's called Accidental Ireland is because I was working kind of just abstractly. But then as I went through my photographs, I saw how almost literal the pieces were to the spaces that I'd been walking through. So you can kind of see these islands or these sort of outcroppings there. And so those are some details. And so now in Siena, one of the reasons why I wanted to come to Italy was because I did the DNA test, and surprisingly, I didn't know there was, maybe 5% Italian, who knew, right? And I assume that it's from my father's side because they were kind of out of Slovakia and that was closer to Ireland. To Italy, and also that side of the family, I was raised kind of Byzantine Catholic. And so I always think of kind of the rich tradition of Catholicism in Italy as well. And so I think that there are some relationships to that. And so the piece that I'm working on upstairs will be based on this idea of fatherland. And so it's looking at the landscape and the kind of deep art and architectural history here of patterns and textures. And I started some of it ahead of time. And this is where I work between analog and digital. I made a series of digital drawings, but then I printed them on these kind of 7-foot long pieces of silk organza. And so the drawing in this is somewhere between the stripes of Siena and DNA double helixes, right? And then, so that's the base layer. And then I was looking at the palette, and I'll continue to look at the palette while I'm here, but I could kind of look through photographs. And so I hand painted with ink the silks as well. And the last part of that will be walking through town and visiting the Duomo and some places to collect kind of drawings. I'll be looking at. I think that the reason why I chose the silk organza was because it's this ephemeral, kind of soft, barely there, kind of transparent material. And I feel like that's sort of my thread to Italy. It's this very small piece that I had not known about. And I think in Italy, fragments are a huge part of, you dig somewhere and you're finding something Etruscan, it's like fragments, and the layers here go so deep into the sediment. But it's also this thing that I don't know. I mean, I guess the DNA tests, they say it can go back about 200 years, and I don't know where it came from. And so I wanted it to be this sort of fleeting kind of thing. And then the other thing I'm doing is creating a really large vinyl painting. And instead of the wood being these small kind of almond shapes, I'm working with wood in this kind of mapping kind of feeling. And so that students might be interested in the process. I did a series of handmade drawings, digitized them, and then had the wood laser cut to create a component of pieces that I'm planning on installing as a kind of lattice in front of this final painting. And then the other drawings I digitized and had cut with a die cutter. Okay. And so some of the imagery for that has to do with like social media maps and family trees and DNA double helixes. And so there's kind of some of the raw parts that I brought. So kind of like a chef, I brought a bunch of good ingredients, and we'll see what happens with them upstairs. So please goodbye. And then another piece that I'm working on toward this ancestral lands thing is I'll be in Scotland in the winter of 24 as a distinguished scholar through the Fulbright Foundation. So I'll be there for 6 months, and I'll be working with landscape and the history there. And I'm looking at like sort of the Scottish diaspora because I know that my family came from Scotland, but and that came through the DNA too. But what I didn't know is that my ancestors were weavers. A little bit of history of looking into that made me have a new interest in textiles. So I took a landscape painting and I actually had it produced into a tapestry. And so I'll be there talking to weavers and different people who are looking at maintaining craft traditions, and I'll be making a series of work through that. So maybe you'll follow me on Instagram or something, and I'll be doing that too. And then the last thing is that I've been a teacher for a long time, and one of the things I am very interested in is students having agency in their own work and process, and also having fun. I think that we might get too serious sometimes in working, and I also think that revision is sometimes painful for people. So I made a series of games that really have a way for you to rethink your process around revision or working further into your work. And so they're almost like tarot cards and stuff, but I have dice, I have the magic 8-ball, and of course, naturally, I turned into the art oracle. And so, so often I will appear at my school as the oracle, and it's requested quite often at different classes. But the interesting thing is that when you make something into a game, it really changes your attitude about taking a risk. And I would encourage you to come play with me upstairs. I will get snacks. I don't have them yet, but please visit the work that I'm doing. I would love to get some feedback, and I would very much like to have you try out the games. I am writing about gamification in art pedagogy too, and how I think that it really changes your mindset when you're making work. And so I'll be presenting at some academic conferences this year and writing about it. And I have a contributing chapter in a book on critique for my dice. I have these little design dice. If you know what design elements and design principles are, this is a way to find a different interaction with how those are activated in your work. And it all is kind of based on chance to a little bit of a, I Ching thing or something, but anyway, and I don't think it's that, there's a tradition of art teachers who use games and chance. If you go back to Dadaism or the Bauhaus and stuff, people really saw how the value of play can open you up to new creative things. And so that's it. And thank you so much for being here.
We have time for a few questions if there's some questions from our in-person audience, or we have an online question that came in. This is from Jeff, who was asking a question about your viral series. He says, in your mind, do the pieces express the pessimism of invasive contagion, the optimism of regeneration, or a balance between contrasting tendencies?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I would say yes. I'm going for the balance. I mean, I really do think about how, I think that history of art has often like just aestheticized nature, and maybe in an attempt to tame it a little bit. And generally what I'm looking at is how I do think nature is beautiful, and I do think that I want the pieces to have like that beauty in some way. But then I also think it's terrifying, you know, and that often the things we're afraid of are invisible, you know, and so, you know, microscopic things are essentially invisible, and they cross borders in ways that we can't see, and so to me that was the thing I could get at about saying nature's beautiful, but it's in control of us, you know, and so I do want to talk about both things. I want it to be kind of a balance. Mhm. Thank you for that question.
Sort of focusing Jeff's question a little bit more, because the piece that you showed in Oakland, the really big one, of the work that you've shown today is the only one that gave me the impression of being menacing.
Yeah.
And the other ones were maybe Jeff was intending more optimistic, or there was a lot of harmony or natural harmony. So I was wondering whether that was just me thinking, oh, this was, you know, product.
I think elegy was menacing. Yeah, I mean, especially in the size of that room, it enveloped you, and I think that's why I put the branch there to sort of a Shinto, you know, tradition or something, to have a place where people could kind of acknowledge that overwhelm. You know, I couldn't make a million of them. Well, maybe if I keep working, I can. But you know, the scale of that experience was something that I think we were all in awe of, and I think that it touched the world. You know, and so it was hard to call that beautiful. You know, but it was how I processed those 3 years. You know, so. I think that piece was probably menacing. And I'm hoping that Ode won't have that. I think that Ode will have more of a renewal sense. And so it's taking literally those pieces and repurposing them into something else, which maybe that's just the continuation of it. And hopefully the kind of beauty of that will come through in that second piece. But thanks for the question. Yeah.
May I just ask how big the Old one is, or maybe you...
Oh, well, I'm making it next month in France, but I have about 3,000 pieces. So, what was in Oakland wasn't the extent of what I made. Actually, it was what would fit in that room. But it will probably be maybe a cloud that's 6 or 7 feet deep and 4 or 5 feet wide, and you know, and I'm not sure how deep it'll go this way, but it depends on the space that I have. I think it'll probably be overhead. Yeah, there's a fireplace room in the space with these old beams and stuff, and so you know, I think it'll mostly be overhead. There might be a central space that comes lower. You know, yeah. I'll post pictures of it.
Questions?
I did read about the history of Siena, though, and the plague was a significant historical impact on this city too, you know, in the Middle Ages, you know, so it was interesting to come here, I guess, on the heels of that. But the piece I'm making upstairs won't have the biscuits. The wall won't really support that anyway, but I'll have things that are more around that imagery of connection to place from a bloodline kind of, you know, area. I don't know if it was Siena, of course, but I think of my experience here as the opportunity to really get a sense of a place in Italy. So, yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask? If there's no one else. The other thing that it really made me think of, maybe because we've just installed a boat from a previous young artist that was here, but is boats have anything? Because to me it also seems like single person boats.
Yeah, I mean, so does it have to do with boats? I forgot to repeat the questions. I mean, certainly the shape suggests, little surfboards or boats or things. And then the piece I did in Connecticut at iPark were, literally floating because it was wood, so that was convenient. But I grew up on water. I grew up in Michigan, and which the Great Lakes there are, they feel like oceans. It takes hours and hours to see the other side and cross, and the waves can get quite big. Not as big as the Pacific, but boats can be lost, at sea there. So I think that water has had a certain part of my life, surfing in California. I gave up sailing for surfing, stuff like that. So water is definitely something that I relate to, and probably the colors, a lot of blues. But actually, the colors from this particular piece were referencing the scrubs of hospital workers, the specific kind of blues and blue greens and stuff from that. And then the other colors kind of had to do with color coding the warning system, the code orange stuff and purple. But I think that there's a current usually in the clusters. It's either like water, how water moves things, or how wind, will pick up leaves and move them around and stuff too. So.
Do you cut them?
Oh, no. So I was working in plywood for a long time. You can see some pieces on my website if you want, but they were kind of these plywood relief pieces that had a reference to kind of aerial landscapes. And often plywood will have this sort of almond-shaped plug in it. And so usually I would let wood grain show in those paintings and sometimes call out those shapes. And then eventually I got the idea I wanted to break borders of the painting and have them, spread. And so I was looking for some kind of component that I could use that would create the effect I wanted. And so I was teaching a woodshop class. And those objects are wood, but they're called biscuits, and they're for joinery, for furniture joinery, and I can get them in different gauges and stuff. So it was a pre-made, thing, and it's great because they're actually made from like sort of a waste product of wood. They're kind of compressed, basswood or something from sort of shredded wood leftovers. So yeah, I can just order them by the thousand in different scales. And it takes a lot to work them to have the surface I want. Like these are a little rougher than maybe some of my smaller pieces, but there were many of them. So,
It's fascinating that each piece is a connector piece in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I think that the piece in France should be up for a year or two. So if anyone's passing through Burgundy, in your travels, I think by May it'll be up at that residency.
Wonderful. And the reference that Miriam made to imagery of a boat reminds me of a painting, I believe, by Sassetta in the Pinacoteca collection that has this sort of a leaf-shaped boat on a lakeside or shoreside. And so there's an interesting resonance I see also with the sort of history of Sienese painting as well. I'll see if I can track down the image to share with you. So Wonderful. Well, if there's not other questions, I think we can, for our in-person audience, shift to continue the discussion over some snacks, but we can sign off with our online audience. I'll just briefly mention later on this week, Miriam mentioned this boat, and in fact, that's connected to an event that we're going to have on Thursday this week at 4:15 will be the inauguration of a sculpture installation at the University of Siena building by Porta Tufi, which is going to be displaying an artwork created by a student from our past semester, addressing the topic of immigration. So Ali Merhi, our student from Lebanon, created this work last semester, and we have this opportunity to show it within the university space, which is a special event. So that'll be, the unveiling will be this Thursday, and then it'll stay on view for at least a month or so. So you're very welcome to come to that as well. But thank you so much to our online viewers and our in-person audience as well. And thanks most of all to Carol for your presentation. And needless to say, I think we're all really looking forward to the month ahead with your gaming proposals. I'm very excited to explore this further. Yes, you're fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much.